So I'm back with another commentary, and I just have to say this. I don't need Sunny Hostin to speak about blacks being Republicans or Latinos being Republican for that matter. People have their own choice when it comes to politics, and regardless of whether you agree or disagree, it's none of your business why people want to align with a certain particular party or ideology. Today on The View, special guest co-host Lindsey Granger, who's up and coming. I don't know if she's a Republican. I don't even know if she's a Democrat. But she was speaking about the White House pretty much promoting Karine Jean-Pierre to being the White House correspondent. She's the first black woman as well as the first LGBT woman in that position, or LGBT person. Now, instead of the conversation sticking on that, it basically went from that to black republicanism. Now, we know how Sunny feels about black Republicans or the Republican Party in general. But it's one thing to discuss the Republican Party. But it's another thing to criticize why a black person chooses to be Republican. Now, I'm going to say Sunny has to be more educated when it comes to politics and the history of blacks and political parties. Blacks at one time, or really for almost a century, were predominantly Republican. Okay? The Democratic Party was not our friend. However, by the 1930s, there was the first switch, and it happened because FDR was elected. He promised to get the country back on its feet, whereas Herbert Hoover had a benign neglect policy when it came to solving the economic crisis, i.e. the Great Depression in the United States of America. He, as an FDR, gave black people not only jobs, but also working assistance, education assistance. He is the father of Social Security insurance plan. That's why we have Social Security in this country. Even though it originated in Italy, he started it. Okay? That's why many of us, our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents became Democrat. That's the first switch. The second switch happens in the 1960s with Kennedy, when Kennedy was running, because black people voted for Eisenhower, but they was not voting for Nixon. So that's when you have the second time blacks leave the Republican Party. The third time was in 1964, when you had the Democratic Convention of that year and all the basic Democrats who were really known as Dixiecrats, because Southern Democrats were really different from Northern Democrats. Many of them were basically like, you know what, to hell with the Democratic Party. We're all going to become Republican, since you basically are voting for policies that's going to benefit black people, particularly in the South. Bye. So that's when you have Republicans or Southern Dixiecrats who go into the Republican Party. And you still had a lot of people that would still leave later on. Like you had a lot of black people that left during Reagan and the Bushes. But that big like exodus was in 1932 and 1964. But they started leaving also in 1959-60. But 32 and 64 was the biggest years, okay? What Sunny is speaking of, she's not totally in the wrong to question how can black people be Republican. But where she's wrong with is assuming that the Republican Party was always filled with open racists. And that's not true. Because a century ago, it was the other way around. But it was starting to change. But she's looking at the Democratic Party through the lens of being from New York and the Democratic Party having the ideologies of Northern Democrats. Because like I said earlier, there's a difference between the two. But she doesn't understand the history of the Democratic Party in the South with the Dixiecrats, where they were not our friends, where they wanted us to be enslaved. And she doesn't understand the radical Republican era, where you had many black people in the 1860s and 70s who were Republican, who were the ones that advocated for the 14th Amendment, which is the reason why you have basically the ability to come to this country and have a child, and your child is a citizen. Birthright citizenship. That came from black Republicans, not black Democrats, okay? Also, what Sunny has to know is that racist Republicans, they would have been Democrats had the 1964 convention never happened, or if it would have went in their favor. This is why it's good to have political education, because you can be wealthy, you can be rich, you can be a mega billionaire, but the political education is going to sustain you in the long run. Okay? You have to know the history of politics in this country if you're going to talk. And the way that Sunny was dismissive, like fixing her hair across her ears, which is like, I don't really want to be a part of this conversation. She was doing that towards Lindsey Granger. Now, Lindsey Granger is up and coming. And I respect Lindsey Granger for holding her own. My issue was that you have an issue with Ana Navarro being a Republican and Latina, but you weren't really hard on her like you were hard on Lindsey Granger. And that is bothersome. That's a bothersome thing. And it isn't just her. There's many black people who are Democrats that can't stand black Republicans or black people being Republican. And that's something that isn't fair, but it's something that I think we should talk about, because a lot of black Republicans have been Republican through centuries, like families. It's like a tradition. Like, I went to school with a girl and I'm still friends with her. I went to school with a girl in elementary school. I'll never forget, we had a mock election. It was, who would you vote for? Mayor Giuliani or David Dinkins? Rudy Giuliani, David Dinkins. We all voted for Dinkins Davis except for one person. And we asked her, how could you vote for Giuliani? And she was like, because he's Republican and my family has always voted for Republican. I'm like, really? She's like, yeah, we've never voted Democrat. And it was the first time I heard this. And I told my grandma. My grandma was like, oh, hell no. Oh, hell no. That is some BS. That's some nonsense, because my grandmother was a staunch Democrat. But I started doing research, not right then, but years later down the line, like when I was in high school, and I learned about black Republicanism, and I understood how, okay, now I understand why you have some people with black Republicans. And I'm going to tell you something. Real traditional black Republicans, they do not act like coons. Many of those black Republicans that you see is that stereotype, that act real coonish, that's always trying to be like dismissive about racism, white supremacy, always want to blame black people for their situations, not really acknowledging that there is a situation of concern when it comes to poverty, anti-black laws, things of that nature. Those are new Republicans, and they're only Republicans because they're following the racist white Republicans of the party, and they hate themselves. Traditional black Republicans are not that. So in all, Sunny is wrong. And I think that Sunny really needs to really study the history of black Republicans going back to the 1850s, pre-Civil War era. Because her being dismissive and her not acknowledging them and her like fixing her ears, that was a sign that she wasn't part of the conversation and she didn't want to hear Lindsey Granger. And Lindsey Granger basically held her own. And I'm going to tell you something. Y'all need to bring her on the View. Y'all need to have on the View because y'all need somebody who's different. Now, I think she's a Republican. I'm not sure, but you need somebody there who is going to challenge the status quo, who's going to challenge the baby boomer generation, who's going to really challenge Sunny Hostin because Sunny Hostin, really smart woman, but she does something where I don't like, where if you don't think like her, she doesn't respect other people's opinions. And if you saw how she was reacting when it came to people not wanting to get the you know what I'm talking about. And with that being said, it's your girl, Miss Analytical. I'm signing off. Thank you for listening to this commentary and have a great day. Later.